Good morning and welcome back to World Talks. I'm Salia Strzemska and we're going to discuss the latest on Russia. So according to the latest polls, 49% of Russians are feeling anxious following the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk. At the same time, municipal elections took place in Russia over the weekend. And according to the Central Election Commission, the Kremlin did not postpone the vote in Kursk at the request of the region's residents. In fact, the turnout in Kursk was one of the highest in the country at 50%. To discuss the current situation in Russia, the recent municipal elections, and what can we expect in the near future, I am joined here this morning by Taras Kuzio, Professor of Political Science, National University of Kyiv, Mohyla Academy. Good morning, sir. Delighted to have you with us.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
So let's start with the survey. 49% of Russians feeling anxious. So this is the highest percentage since the situation in Belgorod last year. So what could this translate into? Do you think that this is the beginning of the Russian society sort of waking up, realizing what's going on?
Every time we have some form of crisis in Russia, in the last 10 years, this kind of question always appears, and I think the response should always be not likely. Russian society is very depoliticized. Some would call it zombified by over 2 decades of state-controlled television, which has been attacking the West, Poland, the Baltic states, Ukraine. Russian civil society is basically non-existent. The opposition is either in prison or in exile or murdered, like with Alexei Navalny. So I think it's highly unlikely that this will translate into something like a kind of an opposition movement. And as for elections, well, there are no such thing in Russia. There are no elections in Russia. These are like in the Soviet Union or in communist Poland. These were a facade. The result is predetermined before the day of the so-called election. So I'm not very optimistic that much will change. I mean, I've seen many interviews of Kursk residents done by Ukrainian journalists and soldiers, and it's just incredible the amount of indoctrination they have received in the last sort of 10 years. I mean, I saw one yesterday where an older lady said the war was begun because Ukraine invaded Russia in 2014. This is a kind of lack of or ignorance and just indoctrination, zombification, however you want to call it. So sadly, unlikely.
Still, however, the Ukrainian side, or at least according to what Vladimir Zelensky said, the Kursk incursion and the fact that it has been successful thus far could be used at the negotiating table in the hopefully near future, right, during peace talks.
Yes. Well, one has to always say here that the Ukrainians have always been underestimated by Western governments. At the beginning of the invasion, every Western government, the Pentagon and ministries of defense everywhere said that Russia would defeat Ukraine within a few days. They were all wrong at the time. Today, they were quite pessimistic about the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk. They didn't think that Ukraine would succeed, or that it wouldn't succeed in its objective of forcing Putin to take away troops from the Donbass to fight in Kursk. They were again proven wrong. Russia has moved troops away from the Donbass to Kursk. The Ukrainian line, Western reporting has been that the Ukrainian lines in the Donbass were about to collapse, were about to be defeated in Pokrovsk and elsewhere. Again, that was wrong. Ukrainians are counterattacking there. They're holding the line. So Zelensky's objectives of firstly showing Putin to be a weak leader, not this machismo strongman. Secondly, to pull troops away from the Donbass to Kursk region to therefore reduce pressure in the Donbass front line. And thirdly, to use this as a bargaining chip in future negotiations have all been proven to be correct. He has been successful in all of those. It's made Ukraine give Ukraine a stronger negotiating position, because prior to the Kursk, many Western governments were pressurizing Ukraine with the idea that you need to do a deal with Putin and to give away some of your territory. Well, that now has gone away.
Right, sir. I know it's slightly off topic, but let me just ask you about the long-range weapons, because I'm trying to understand the logic, right? I mean, Kursk incursion was done without, let's say, officially at least asking the West for permission. So why is the US so reluctant to greenlight the use of long-range weapons by Ukrainians? And also, Germany is not providing the Taurus missiles. So why is this such a big issue?
Well, they claim it's to do with so-called escalation, but I don't think that's the real reason. The real reason is that the Biden administration and many European countries, such as Germany, maybe France, don't have a goal of Russia's military defeat. That is the key question. A number of countries do have that goal: the Baltic states, Scandinavia, Poland, Romania, Britain. Have a real concrete goal that they have said publicly: we seek Ukraine's victory, Russia's military defeat. The US and Germany have not said that. And therefore, because they haven't said that, this is going to be a kind of a never-ending war. They don't want Ukraine to be successful necessarily on the battlefield. They want to give Ukraine enough weapons for it to not be defeated, but not enough weapons or not enough permission for Ukraine to be successful. And then this leads to, of course, a war where Ukraine is fighting with one arm up its back. This hypocrisy, this double standard, is now made even worse because in the last few days there have been reports that Iran has transferred some very long-distance missiles to Russia, which Russia will use against Ukraine. And of course, Ukraine is not allowed to strike back against these missile launch centers. So it's not just Western countries. Here we have the hypocrisy of Israel as well, because Prime Minister Netanyahu, until the Hamas attack on the 7th of October of last year, was very close to Putin. And he has refused, Netanyahu and the Israeli government, which used to be very pro-Russian, has refused to support Ukraine, or has refused to give defensive even weaponry to Ukraine, even though Iran and Russia have a strong military alliance, and the goals of Iran and Russia are to destroy, eradicate from the face of the earth Ukraine and Israel. So there's a lot of strange double standards and hypocrisy here, which I think is not going to be good for the future, because it's not good for Ukraine that this war will continue indefinitely, because that means more people killed, more destruction, the inability to return to as a peaceful reconstruction. So the Western policy is failing here on this, as is Israeli policy.
Right, but let's go back to Volodymyr Zelensky, who recently spoke with Olaf Scholz, and they said that the next sort of Ukraine peace summit is supposed to include Russia as a participant, perhaps also China if Russia attends. So do you think that this could possibly take place? And would that be the beginning of possible peace talks, perhaps?
I'm not very optimistic about the peace talks. I mean, Zelensky wants to hold a second peace summit. The first one was in July in Switzerland. A second peace summit before the US elections, or before the results publicized of the US elections. Obviously, because of the fear of maybe Donald Trump being elected US president. So that's the goal. I really doubt that Russia would agree to attend. China maybe, India maybe, but I somehow doubt that Russia would, because Russia's goal in its invasion has not changed, and that goal is the destruction of independent Ukrainian state and the destruction of Ukrainian national identity. So the idea that Putin would attend and agree to withdraw his troops, I just simply don't believe this is possible. Plus, Putin's always going to look at this that if he attended, he would come across publicly as seen to be weak. And no dictator can come across and look weak in his own country, because that would be a reason for other people in Putin's entourage to possibly remove him. When you asked about the Russian public, I don't have faith in the Russian public doing anything. But let's remember that Russia is a mafia society, and there is no honor amongst thieves. So if there's ever going to be some attempt to remove Putin, it's going to be in Putin's circle of people, like with Prigozhin last year. So this would be dangerous for Putin. Kursk is dangerous for Putin, and attending a peace conference, which is run by Ukraine, would be dangerous for Putin, because it would send an image of him being weak.
Unless he manages to somehow manipulate the rhetoric, to sort of try and sort of manipulate it in his own favor. Because according to a different survey that I came across, it was published by Voice of America, apparently 38% of respondents in Russia are saying that the war has reduced their options or ruined their plans, and 14% reports on losing a job, and 36% on the decrease in income. So perhaps there will be some internal pressure eventually for Putin to try and come to the negotiating table.
Everything is possible, but Russia is losing 1,200 casualties a day. The figure is just mind-boggling. 1,200. Russia is able to replenish these numbers with volunteers and people being mobilized every month. So there are enough Russians still willing to die, or hopefully they think that they will survive, to get paid these huge bonuses to go and fight in Ukraine. If Putin begins to run out of soldiers with such a high casualty rate, that's where the pressure would begin to build on Russia, because nobody really believes that such high casualty rates can continue. As for manipulating the information sphere, as it were, I'm sure that's possible, because there are people in the West, like Chancellor Scholz of Germany, who would be very happy to go into history as a peacemaker, where Ukraine would lose territory. Now, I don't believe that this is really possible, because Zelensky would find it extremely difficult to propose to the Ukrainian public that, yes, we have to sign this peace agreement and we lose 20% of our territory, because there would be another Euromaidan-style revolution in Kyiv. The public would not accept it. Something like 75% of Ukrainians now have experienced either a friend or a member of their family being wounded or killed in this war. So that level of bloodshed has affected most Ukrainian population. So I think it's going to be very difficult for Zelensky to kind of propose some kind of capitulation, if you want to call it that, the loss of territory. And so much, of course, of this depends on what happens in the US elections at the end of this year.
Right. Taras Kuzio, thank you, Professor, for speaking with us this morning. I wish our conclusion was a bit more optimistic, but let's wait and see how things develop. Much appreciated.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
And thank you for watching World Talks. Please stay tuned for more here on TVP World. World news coming up next.